Hey, everybody. My name is Jorn. Thank you for joining us here today. Some housekeeping. At least you are in the right place. This is the webinar you intended to join, and if you accidentally join the wrong webinar, I'd like to tell you this is the right webinar, no matter what you're trying to do today. I'm going to be playing MC here. I'm going to be watching the Q&A off on the side, making sure that Mark and Jimmy behave, getting them refreshments, things like that. From a housekeeping standpoint, you see this on the screen. So the best place to drop questions is the Q&A box. Sometimes things roll away in chat, so you should have a QA box somewhere on your screen. Now is the time to go look for it. If we have the opportunity, time permitting, and the flow feels like it's right, we could even try taking people off of mute and letting them talk. Oh, God. And you've already agreed to the robot lady asking you to record this. We will get this posted somewhere on the interwebs as soon as practicable. My goal is today to get that taken care of. So let's get rolling here. I'd like to introduce our panelists, our fireside chat, our Between Two Ferns guys today. So the Mark Manning, old school hacker, spent years compromising containers, doing sandboxing in Kubernetes environments. He's at Snowflake right now, securing their infrastructure. That's a pretty heavy lift. Mark spent time doing pen test consulting, exploiting container environments, that rascal. He's presented at lots of conferences you've probably been at, like ShmooCon, Black Hat, GRCCon, other B-Sides events. And Jimmy, you probably heard of Jimmy too. Jimmy is also a veteran in the security space and an engineering leader. He's focused on building cloud-native security products. He recently held senior leadership positions at a number of enterprises, including Signal Sciences, which was acquired by Fastly. He's led a team of researchers and engineers, both on the offensive and defensive sides has Jimmy played. And he's also been an independent consultant tasked with building very large-scale cloud security programs, delivering technical security training, product research, and securing some of the largest container environments in the world. He's a well-versed public speaker. You've seen him at seminars as well as Local MocoSec, KubeCon. I've seen him there, RSA, NDC, CactusCon, and AppSec USA. And that is a mouthful. And I'm going to take a sip of water and kind of let these guys get rolling. But as an icebreaker, a non-Kubernetes security related question, I know one of you participated in this and it came rolling by. It's a math question. And somebody on the interwebs asked, in the whole world, planet Earth, are there more doors or wheels?
You went with it. Awesome. Discuss.
Discuss.
This is a viral Twitter poll that's going around that has sparked some serious discussion.
I got sucked into my own mind and I had to just shut the screen.
Yeah, it's well, before we answer that, thank you, Jordan. That was quite an intro. You nailed my whole entire career in one paragraph. So thank you.
Thanks for attending, folks. Good night.
I think wheels are everywhere. I think they're hidden in places we don't know about. I do struggle because wheels probably came after the door, and there may be historically more doors. One of our coworkers mentioned there's heaps of old tires sitting in trash piles over the planet over the years. It is such a hard question, but my house has a lot of doors, and I just can't decide. So I'm just going to take a side with wheels because they are they make things move. Is a barrier wheel? I don't know.
Jimmy, you're so wrong. It's 100% doors. I don't know. Yeah. It's doors because there's so many things that can be a door, right? Like doors are a metaphor, and doors are like every opening is a door. So now, like, what, cracks are doors? Like, I think it's doors, man.
Yeah. Or even somebody on the Twitter thread said like bivalves, right? A clamshell could be a door.
Yeah. That was what I was going to throw out. Like, maybe we need to throw some guardrails around this and say the object must have been intended by its purpose to either been a wheel or a door. Does a clamshell count? I don't know. Maybe we should say human created.
Yeah, I think there are no qualifiers. That's the question, though.
Yeah. I was even trying to think of what the answer was in my own house, and then I got a headache.
Well, Kubernetes is a door, right, to all sorts of fun future infrastructure and discussion. So we'll just leave it at that. It's also a door from a security perspective, as we're going to talk about today, I guess. What's up, Mark? How you doing today?
I'm good. How you doing? How's KSOC?
Today's a good day. We're bringing on engineers. We have our first all company offsite, or is it called onsite when you're fully remote? Not sure. In Boston at the end of this month. Super excited to bring our global team together and for a week of fun and mayhem and container escapes as well. So that should be really good.
I'm jealous. That sounds great.
Yeah, it's I don't know if I haven't been in person, so we'll see how large groups goes. It's going to be exhausting to some degree after 2 years of COVID, but here we are. So we have a lot of stuff to talk about today, and really excited for Mark to be here. And this is kind of like the official first KSOC webinar, and I've done a lot of these in the past, but this one's special, and because we have Jordan and Mark and the whole team listening in and a list of attendees. So I have Q&A opened. Please feel free to ask questions about whatever. I see some familiar faces in the attendee list. So shout out to everyone that took time out of their day to hang out with us. So we'll just let Jordan kind of run with this and
the question I expected.
see what he can drum up.
Yeah, the question I expected, because somebody will ask this. What's KSOC stand for?
I don't even know that.
Well, KSOC, which is plastered all over my Zoom screen, stands for Kubernetes Security Operations Center, right? So SOC is a term that we've loved or hated over the years in security. This is our take on a modern containerized, modern infrastructure security operations center. And we flip a lot of the traditional kind of nomenclature around it. We flip it around and do things a little differently. But yeah, that's what it stands for. And so we have 4-letter domain, which was super exciting to get.
That's true. Those are hard to come by, aren't they?
Crowned achievements over the past 3 years.
Right. If you can't get the domain, you don't have a company.
Yeah.
I also see another one coming in QA, and everybody get your questions in here so people don't take cuts in front of you. Another one I also expected, because I was reading about this morning, and I'm going to read this question and then I'll put my own little frame around it. The question is, can you talk about this dirty pipe exploit that everybody's been discussing the last couple of days? And I have some observations too, and I want to sort of set the table for both of you, whoever wants to go first. It's another one of, it's a CVE, right? And thankfully there is a patch, right? Sometimes our CVE is like, look, an exploit exists, and womp womp, nothing you can do about it. There is a patch, but are we okay? Right? Like, oh, everybody just patch and the world's going to be fine. What do we say to the patch squad?
Good luck with that. If you're constantly patching like all day, I think it's an anti-patch, right? Like at a certain point, we've got to get ahead of this stuff and get better tools. I think as a whole, dirty pipe was fun because arbitrary read or arbitrary write, even when you only have read permission, right? Like so, the exploit path is juicy. Where you can say, I don't even have permission in the Linux file system to access this file, but suddenly I'm able to write to it. And I'm able to write to arbitrary file system objects as long as I know the path. Like that's super exciting. So awesome priv-esque path. I think it's definitely going to impact Kubernetes, right?
Yeah, I mean it has to, because a container is just a process, and that process can have certain privileges. This kind of breaks the privilege model that we relied on for at least file system access, right? You think about a container that's that's running in the form of a deployment across multiple nodes in a cluster, all sharing maybe some file or set of files, and that container was never supposed to be able to write to that file. Now you're in a distributed CVE riddled sort of situation that could turn really bad. And I think privilege escalation specifically is the path here. Write something malicious to the file system that wasn't supposed to be there, ultimately accessing the Kubernetes API, which is kind of game over, right? You become the kubelet, abuse RBAC, poke at etcd, whatever you want to do inside of the cluster. This is a great path to get there, in my opinion.
Even one of the examples of the exploit that I saw was writing right straight back down to the original image.
Yeah.
So that respawn containers, write it to the image, and it sprays wide pretty quickly.
The container image, yeah. This is the exploit path from Kubernetes. You go like, okay, I've compromised the container, got remote code execution. Now I can do this, dirty pipe thing. I compromise the file system overlay object of the container, and now we're modifying the actual container image, like you said. And then from there, I make a case that and so what though? Because maybe it's a little spicy, but you've compromised a node in Kubernetes attack land. That's just one stage. That's just one box in a cluster of hundreds and however many nodes. And more specifically, you've compromised one node, probably in one node pool. So you got to expect the next path is, like Jimmy was saying, you got to escalate to the next layer. You're eventually going to have to interface with Kubernetes API. Maybe you're going to steal kubelet creds that are on that node, and then phone home to the control plane. But eventually it has to come back to the Kubernetes API. I'm trying to think of is there even a way to take this and just compromise the whole cluster without accessing the API? I don't know, Jimmy. Can you even think?
Well, I think maybe you also could just interact directly with your container runtime, right? Just do Docker commands on the node. You're going to bypass 95% of anything that's watching those particular running workloads from Kubernetes land. That's definitely a path forward. And I think there's a lot that will come out of this, right? Dirty cow, dirty pipe, all of these things have long tail effects, right? Because, my question to you, Mark, is if I'm running managed Kubernetes, am I safe? Right? Not, yeah. I don't know. I'm not sure the status of all of those different providers and their kernel versions. And I'd imagine it's a scramble. What would managed Kubernetes give you in this case?
Right. Again, you can priv-esc some way. You can imagine that, okay, we've got a compromised node. Do we feel like all of the nodes are compromised inherently? Or do we have observability to watch how this one compromised node pivots to another one? I don't know. GKE tries to isolate its control plane better than others. There's a lot of mitigations that have to go into to compromising the rest. So it's a situation of go do some research. You're going to have to figure it out yourself in your own environment, right?
Is there a way to secure, that's a broad term, right? Secure your clusters against the kind of behavior that's being exploited here, and or watch for that kind of behavior, that drift, something has changed? Because again, I worry about, the make sure you're patched crowd. Patching takes time, or somebody has to get exploited first. While a CVE exists, guess what? CVE exists. The chain of events that happen to allow somebody to exploit the exploitable is some sort of pattern we should be watching for.
Yeah, I think so. I think I'm describing, there's an attack chain, right? Just because there's an exploit path, it doesn't mean you can exploit it, and it doesn't make it clear how they're going to exploit it. So that chain, as it goes through remote code execution, local priv-esc, up to the rest of the cluster, it's pretty linear. We can kind of imagine what that's going to look like and how that's going to impact the rest of the clusters. I don't know, Jimmy, what do you think? Do you think you're going to see visibility on this?
Yes, but will it be too late? Maybe, by the time that you get to that point, I think these sort of things can help teams sleep better at night if you practice and harden early, right? Like we can assume the next 30 something is going to come out next month, next quarter, whatever it may be. What are we going to do about it? And I hate the term zero trust, but it's really comes down to, assume that these kind of CVE style, issues that have their own logo that really affect everything that you're running, assume they're going to come out and that they're going to be exploited on day zero. What's the hardening that needs to be in place to get ahead of that? And I see Magno, who is always a friend of KSOC and what's up, Magno? He mentioned file integrity monitoring. What are your thoughts on that, Mark? I've used FIM a lot in the past with little to no success, but curious to see what your thoughts are in kind of a Kubernetes ecosystem, if this would help, hurt, or maybe even put you in a worse off spot because it wouldn't see problems kind of persisting from dirty pipe. I don't even like saying dirty pipe.
I know. You feel dirty saying dirty pipe?
It's just that's fine.
It's a stupid name. There, I said it. Anyway, it's too late. It's out.
I don't really know what kind of file system activity honestly happens on a normal cluster. To say like we can monitor for integrity stuff, like that's tough. Maybe some specific areas, but you'd have to get low level. Again, it's like into the kernel. You'd have to try to inspect the intent of a syscall, and it's just a losing battle to do it at that level, I think.
Could we even reliably watch on the integrity of the images? Back to my "you can write to the image now" example. I mean, you're talking about container drift. Has it drifted if everybody's writing? If all spawned containers are now writing off what looks like the blessed image?
Yeah, I think you can overwrite the container image, which it depends on like your image pull setup, right? Like, are you going to pull from your container registry every single time? Is it going to update from the latest like SHA-256 checksum? Like, I think that's controllable, but oh man, if you compromise the registry, I hope you have all those authenticity controls that you've bolted on at this point. But you're going to be in trouble otherwise.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, your image pull policy, if you're just pulling like a cached image on each of the nodes, yeah, you could be in trouble. But yeah, if you've tainted the image registry with this thing, I don't even know if digital signatures would help you, right? You would just sign the vulnerable kind of image, maybe. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. That's yet to be surfaced in at least in my travels.
Yeah, I think like Cosign is working towards this, where it's like the idea that the cluster never even has the private keys. They're just given the signed image. It sits in the registry. Mm-hmm. So even if you own that registry, something can go through and like validate that signature like externally outside of the cluster. So if your cluster compromised, it can kind of slow that down. But that's just, again, like one specific attack vector. I don't think we've solved much there, but we definitely agree that it's here and it's a challenging problem.
And in this, maybe the last one on this example, right? There are multiple ways. Container drift is, sometimes can mean lots of things, but if you look at many of the container drift solutions, all they're looking for is, hey, is the running container, has it differed from the image? Well, in this case, nope, everything's fine here. So if you I think that talks to defense in depth. If you're relying on one thing to tell you everything is okay, mm-hmm. Kind of worrisome.
So patch your clusters, ask your cloud. And we'll talk about other ways to get ahead of these things. I will recommend the dirtypipe.cm for all, right? Like the original write-up of this. It's a beautiful write-up. It's just got code samples. It's so well written. This issue came from a customer problem that they were having. It's just, the whole thing is a joy to read. So I'm going to paste well, maybe I'm not going to paste it in chat because it's Q&A, but you'll find it. Yeah, definitely check it out.
I've got another one in the Q&A. This comes from Amy. It looks like Amy must have been reading the KSOC website. Thanks for reading the website, Amy. And she says, you talk about Kubernetes infrastructure inventory and the fact that you can't protect what you can't see. Can you explain how it is people can't see their Kubernetes clusters? All the smiles from you guys.
Yeah. So
like, how could this be?
Yes, security historically is terrible at this. Like my first job 15 years ago out of college was turning on a web application firewall for our internet facing applications at a large, very large company. Finding just on day one, you don't have a single person to ask. There's not a system that exists, but finding just your publicly accessible domain names for your web app properties, impossible. Maybe I hit 50% if I'm lucky. That hasn't changed. We've gotten better, I think, with IAC, but like cloud asset inventory as a topic is insane. The abstractions are all over the place. So to say that we know where every workload, every cluster, even every like cloud account is at a large company that's gone through multiple acquisitions, we've spun off some things, we've grown, we've shrunk. I mean, you don't know where all your clusters are all the time. And how are you gonna actually tackle hardening, distributing policy, observing issues, fixing issues if you can't have a clear and accurate asset inventory? So I wish we were in a better place, but I don't think we are today. And that's where kind of KSOC has started some of these conversations is like, where are your clusters? I don't know. Okay, let us help you find them. So at least that's my take.
I just want to second that because like I've seen so many customers that were, there's two kinds of customers that would come in and say like, do a security review of my cluster. Here's the cluster. Okay, cool. Like you've already got to handle a little bit on Kubernetes. And then there's others that are just like you said, through acquisitions, through like just the fact that like maybe the DevOps team has kind of done their own thing for a while and poof, you've got Kubernetes. And they take like this other, like even if your security engineering team is super mature, they try to go and like apply it to Kubernetes and those same controls don't always work. So you're at the point of like, okay, you got a security engineering team that's smart, but like, what is this cluster doing? And like, how do I get visibility into this? Maybe I know where it is, but I don't know anything about it. I can't nmap it. I'm not going to like Nessus my Kubernetes cluster. It wouldn't make much sense.
Yeah. And managed Kubernetes made the world more ephemeral on a cluster level, right? So with EKS control, like definitely there's some CLI sort of opportunities for developers, anybody with the access, the IAM credentials and permissions to spin up a cluster, modify it, spin it down, make an external load balancer, all of these things, right? So I think that's good. We should embrace that. But I can't, every person I've talked to is like, well, I think this team's doing something over in GCP when we're an AWS shop. It's the theme everywhere. And you're like, well, what are they doing? I don't know. I think there's Kubernetes involved. It's like
you actually raise a good point, right? Because you'll find something. Well, let's talk to our cloud people. They're like, hey, we're kind of AWS people. So somebody deployed in GCP. We're like, meh. I've seen that myself. I've gone over to Azure and went, well, I feel dumb. Yeah, I've seen that happen. Magno's in with another question. I'll read it out loud so the whole audience can have it. Magno says, what do you recommend to deal with Kubernetes security and compliance, because they're different things, when you're leveraging multi-cloud managed services such as GKE, EKS, and AKS? Is KSPM the best approach here? Good segue, man.
Yeah. Bringing in the acronyms. I love it, Magno.
Better tell the audience what KSPM stands for.
Kubernetes Security Posture Management. It's gonna own it right there. So CSPM, right? Cloud Security Posture Management, traditionally watches one or many cloud environments for the posture of your everything, right? From IAM, network policies, I mean, you name it, EC2 instances and AWS. Like, so KSPM is a more targeted approach that we believe does solve this, right? Like, if we are betting on the fact that Kubernetes is at the epicenter of your compute program for the next 5 to 10 years, we should have tools specialized in the discovery, the events, the deletions, the metadata, the security around the cluster as a whole. It's different than, I don't see Kubernetes, an EKS cluster is just like a line item in a CSPM tool. I think there's more to it than that because of the hidden gotchas that exist in Kubernetes and how big an individual cluster can be. So
you could even say, like, we've talked about this before, like, Kubernetes value, I guess the best case I've ever seen someone saying like why Kubernetes is it becomes your cloud. Like, it provides an API across your clouds. It's agnostic. It doesn't matter, like EKS, AKS, whatever. And now you're back to, I just need security posture of my cloud again. Like, and it now has more consistent APIs. So the value of Kubernetes across multi-cloud environments is super strong. And now it's basically the same product, right? Like CSPM stuff versus KSPM, but it doesn't matter. It's the same idea, inventory, hooking in the stuff, and gotta get it done.
Sounds like we should talk about events then, I think, and why they're why they're important.
Well, I was going to bring up the example, like the cloud security posture stuff was always, before that, it was kind of like, I'm going to do some scans, right? Like, I worked for a company that had like a cloud scanner. They'd say, point in time, I'm going to scan some stuff. I'm going to give you your cloud security posture. It's like a real specific point in time stuff. Like, it's useful, like, great. And now I've got like kind of a problem set. For Kubernetes, like, you're talking about how ephemeral it is. Nodes burn, pods burn. You don't even know like necessarily when they get scheduled all the time. Like, having full visibility into that and saying like, yeah, I ran CIS benchmark tools to tell me what's wrong with it. Like, there's been so many attack vectors that I've leveraged, during pen tests or something like that, just because the scans weren't run at that moment that I was deploying something malicious, right? You don't necessarily know what's happening. So
a question for both of you then, because I of course came with my own list of questions because I like to learn too. And that kind of taps what you were saying there, Mark. What do people do to detect security issues? And then more importantly, because I've seen this all the time, people are like, oh, thank you, security product, for a list of things that are wrong with my cluster. How do I fix them? And there are a couple, schools of thought widely on across, and like, fix them all for me, make the robot do the fixes. And then there are those of us doing, you don't want robots altering your operations environment. So thoughts, how do you pick a tool and that hot topic, or even the third rail of remediation that's not a manual task?
Yeah, I could start. I feel like Jimmy's going to have some strong opinions here on where we can go. But in my opinion, it's most organizations are doing like collection of CVs, collection of potential flaws, and we don't know the remediation path. So I've mostly seen products that just give you like, here's a bunch of CVs, go fix them. Good luck. Or they go in the other direction where it's like, hey, here's a real problem in your networking. I'm going to handle networking for you, and I'm going to tell you when you need to block stuff in. And I don't like that extreme either, just in that you're stuck with that thing. That thing is now the primary security control of your environment, and talk about vendor buy-in. Like, it's now the main thing doing security for you. So I don't have a good, solution per se, but my take is there's extremes on both ends that we need to, get around and compensate for.
Yeah, I mean, I echo that. I actually I come from a Kubernetes security training background, which is super niche in a lot of ways. But what I found was 90% of attendees of any given class, I mean, it's thousands of people over the years, were developers. the folks responsible for, shipping a microservice, or they were tasked with kind of transitioning from, their EC2, Chef, whatever the way they were kind of pushing out software into production, and Kubernetes was all of a sudden thrown on their laps. So education is still important, right? Like, I think there's a lot missing on jumping straight into very deep, scary tooling that does manipulate things in ways that you can't predict and or ever get out of. So, the fundamentals are still there to be learned in Kubernetes security, container security, cloud in general. And then mixed with that, like, I think before you even pick a tool, like, there's some assumptions we need to make about the year. What year is it? 2022. Multi-cluster, multi-cloud, just the standard, right? Like, we're not like cherry picking one-off clusters that we're kind of babysitting over the years. These are things that are going to grow into tens or hundreds of clusters. So how do you deal with the view into those from a security perspective? I think that's hard. I don't think we've fully solved that across the board. And then, like, we're also seeing tools that are pretty hungry to eat your RAM, your CPU. They have a lot of different agents, and the value isn't there. So the burden to install should be low and performance should be kept high. I believe that if you write a rule or choose to kind of, build your own custom set of policies, detections, responses, you should own those as well. As much as I am now a vendor, vendor lock-in is not something, it's not our top 3 priority at KSOC. So, and again, like, the event-driven piece, right? Like, periodic scans I don't think they work, right? Like, clusters change every 5 minutes. And if you're scanning every day or every hour, you're missing the full story from a detection and response perspective, but also just like IR, right? Like, how do you even know the journey of a deployment? It could have been changed 16 times between your last CIS benchmark scan. If you're not collecting every revision and showing basically the burn down, whether it's up or down, of things getting better or worse, then you're not really telling the full story.
There's a lot there. I wanted to jump in on, like, the multi-cluster stuff, because
for sure.
That's the most common one, where you see organizations say, I'm going to do Kubernetes. And first they start out, maybe I'll do like one cluster, and it evolves. And, like, I don't think there's a world where people are not running multiple clusters at this point. Like, even if it's just dev and prod, like, you don't just have a single cluster. We have to say how many clusters, where are they located, and then even they have their own authorization controls, like who is managing that cluster over there. And then compliance calls you up. Back to your earlier question, compliance calls you up and says, hey, show me how you're CIS compliant or whatever your organization is using. And maybe you do that for one cluster, or maybe you've got agents or something that's reporting something back. But, like, you need to manage the whole thing all at once concurrently. Like, you don't have, unless you have separate security teams for each of the clusters, it doesn't make any sense. You want to have one single authority that says, here's my perspective on the clusters.
Yeah, it's a huge problem. I was trying to, do you remember the project Kubernetes back in 2018? I think it was a, I don't know if it was, I can't remember if it was an actual Kubernetes,
or was it just a
core
fever
project? It was like in the Gardener aspect. It was an attempt at this from like almost like cluster API sort of perspective, but we don't have that. And now we just have clusters floating around. And the additional thing I would add to that is assume people need to access Kubernetes clusters, right? Like people and service accounts. I have yet to see a place that isn't moving towards like all the observability, the zero access. Like no one will ever queue control into this environment. That's a good goal. I just think we should not assume that we're there. There's still break glass accounts. Most places are still having devs like just kube control to do all their monitoring, right? Or debugging on the fly. And I think that's something we didn't quite predict was going to be as big a problem as it is. It's just people are problematic, right?
What do you think is like best practices? Because I've seen extremes. I've seen okay, we're going to do just-in-time access controls. We'll say like, we're going to mint you like some job that represents your identity at that time, and cool, like now you get access to prod. I've seen those Uber clusters. I've seen some big organizations that are making a Kubernetes cluster that deploys other clusters, right? And then saying like, I'm granting you access to your entire cluster. Like, it would be nice if everyone had the pockets to be able to, whenever you need to run a workload in Kubernetes, you get your own entire cluster. But I think most organizations are falling in between something, right? Like, what have you seen? What do you think are going to be like the practices in the future?
Well, I think we've informally settled on, for better or worse, like namespaces as that level of abstraction, right? Carving out. It'd be nice if it's definitely for worse. We do wish that everybody had their own little isolated cluster, but I don't think we're going down that path. But it's every end of the spectrum, right? There's like having a bastion box that has kube control on it that you have to SSH to, that has like all the FIM and HID stuff, and like you're really adding a lot of burden if you ask your devs to like do crazy stuff on like some bastion host in a DMZ somewhere. There's things like that. There's totally leveraging your cloud's credentials, right? Like AWS IAM. There's management problems there in EKS. And as soon as you span over into GCP land, it doesn't scale to anything or zero. There's things like DEX and these kind of middleware kind of tools that integrate OIDC. I think this is going to, it's already rearing its head. I think the future, and shameless plug, like we are working on this to make this vastly more efficient from a development perspective. Like, I don't think we need to slow down developers. We should grant access when appropriate to the minimal amount of objects in a cluster for the minimal amount of time. But most importantly, we should be watching what those individuals and service accounts are doing with a microscope, right? Like Magno just asked about incident response. I don't think we have a good story there. Like, I just think Kubernetes doesn't, like, people are taking snapshots of etcd. They're shoving API logs in S3 with no avail to look at them or understand what they're doing. There's not a lot of, it's a bit of a panic, right? Like you're relying on almost like OS level logs to figure out what happened in Kubernetes land. And I think IR in the worst case is destroy the cluster and spin up a new one and like hope it's not going to happen again. In the best case, you have at least the logs, right?
I think you just blew up the whole Kubernetes IR industry with that statement, because I think that's what most people are doing, right? They're just like, oh, there's an incident, burn it down. We've got the Terraform to rebuild it. Like, IR complete.
That's better than what I've seen a lot of organizations do, because in incident management, it usually goes to an IR team that's been around for a long time. And in a traditional environment, what do? Well, you SSH into the offending host and fix it. And you close the ticket. And so you see people doing, kubectl exec, and they exec into the container and they fix the VM. And like, cool. And then the next day that incident comes back. They're like, why? I'm like, it's
just all of that
cluster
stuff.
And it's containers.
You go back into the break glass of like the IR situation. Break glass, okay, IR needs to do something. Okay, IR doesn't need to do everything. They don't need to do it on the whole cluster. Maybe it's a specific node. How do you control that? How do you confine that? And I think the other thing to put into this is some organizations are abstracting away access and saying, to deploy something, you don't need kubectl to apply your YAML from your local laptop. Like, that's an anti-pattern. But to do to limit the number of service accounts, to make it easier to just now say like, okay, there's only 10 people today that logged into my production cluster. That's a win. And I know exactly what those 10 people are doing, as opposed to like, there's hundreds of people logging into different namespaces. Do we have all the context to be able to say what they were doing at that point in time? It's hard.
Well, Mark, I think you segued into a pretty hot topic. I know it's a hot topic for Jimmy, and that's the mess that is RBAC, especially when it comes to not just Kubernetes, but lots of this multi-cluster environment. How do I do RBAC in even a medium-sized organization without just throwing my hands up and going, I don't know, I quit, root for everybody?
From the attacker's perspective, let me just say, like, you should quit. Because it's snarky, but like there's just so many different ways that you could get in. Like that, this is the problem. Like, okay, I use that RBAC perfectly. I've granted access to this thing, and then like I just saw, Rory McCune come out with like, if you have this level of access that you think is benign, it also gives you like root into the whole thing because of the way that scheduling works. And there's so many snaky ways to privask in the cluster that even like the developers don't appreciate. And all you're at is the point of like, can I detect that? Or the other example that I like to cite is secrets. And there would be a bunch of pen tests we'd go on. Like, the pen testers don't need access to our secrets. Those are very secure, such and such. So I'm only going to give them list access in Kubernetes to list the secret, to just see that they're there. What they don't realize is Kubernetes doesn't really have an idea of listing secrets. It returns the entire secret back to you when you list it. And then the command line just determines what to show you, right? So list and get of a secret are the exact same thing. So you can recover all this stuff. So here you are, you're reading the doc. It says, I'm going to do get permissions on this RBAC control, and it still bites you in the foot. However you want to think about that. So how do we solve this, Jimmy? how do we solve all of RBAC?
Fix it, Jimmy.
Fix it. Yeah. Before, just to the last note on IR, one of the better public incident response write-ups I've seen is from JW Player, their engineering team. This is several years ago. They found a cryptocurrency miner running on one of their nodes, and they documented in a Medium article and on their site, like what they did to figure it out, like what tripped this into existence. And it was Datadog, just general CPU, like watching the CPU of a given node. It spiked at 100%. It wasn't a security tool. It was just like stuff we've been doing forever. And then the incident response was like, at least they didn't tear down the cluster, right? They kept it and like stopped traffic, like rerouted traffic to a different cluster. But anyways, RBAC, it's so flexible and so highly configurable that we will never have it. We will never have every like attack path completely solved, right? It's like dealing with kernel system calls kind of in a way where you're just like, what's the impact of that particular call, and how can it talk to other things and these different attack paths? I think the best we can do with RBAC is try our hardest at least privilege, right? Like give in access that for humans that is short-lived. If I can limit the amount of time I'm poking around trying to exploit these things, and then all of a sudden everything goes away and what I've done is logged, I can hopefully get better over time. The service account discussion in RBAC is really difficult as well, because these are usually long-lived credentials that need to go somewhere and do a thing to interact with the Kubernetes API, and you don't have the ability to just like sever access. So I think we're entering a future where, I've already done prior to KSOC like RBAC audits on clusters as like a service, right? Like that's weird. Like to think like people are, and we're just going to incrementally get better. But proactive monitoring service is,
I was just going to say like that no one's dropping ODAs on Kubernetes as much as they're just exploiting misconfigurations. Like that's the biggest threat. They need a better understanding of, what is possible in my cluster. I have no idea.
Yeah. I think knowing knowing your RBAC landscape, scoping it down, automatically ingesting the Kubernetes API audit logs and kind of marrying that with the RBAC that exists to try to get better over time without completely eliminating access is our best hope. And then we're drumming up some cool anomaly detection features, right? Like there's stuff happening inside that doesn't look right. Like you, as a pen tester coming in, try and get secrets, list secrets, all of these different actions against the Kubernetes API, and some are allowed, some are denied. There's patterns there that we're identifying that are known bad. So that's one piece of it as well. And I'll just leave the RBAC conversation at, this is the Kubernetes threat model, right? It's Kubernetes is responsible for what historically we've distributed across multiple different kind of control planes. There's secrets stored in the same environment. There's access control. There's RBAC, networking. I mean, all of these things are jammed into this project in quotes. It's grown up into it. I think the areas of concern are just really hard due to privilege escalation and traversal and getting from a remote code execution vulnerability through a web app to accessing your Kubernetes API and dumping secrets. That's a really bad blast radius. Like it's just like not a pretty one. And all we can do is chip away at that through tooling and good hardening practices from the beginning.
While you were
Jordan's
talking,
got a poll up.
Yeah, I put a poll out there actually what everybody was talking about. So I wanted to see what those answers were. And thank you for answering. And if you haven't answered, click a button. Be random. But maybe I'm missing one of the answers. Are you guys ready for another question from the audience? Another favorite topic of mine. So I'm just going to bite my lip and let you guys talk about this. Here it comes. The question is, do you think that security vendors will need ebpf access inside managed Kubernetes to the control plane to be able to provide better runtime security? Oh, ebpf, our messiah. Discuss.
You want to go first?
I'll let Mark go first.
I mean, we can set the stage a little bit. There's kind of two angles of why people use ebpf today. One is it's a highly performant network, inspection tool of some sort. We've seen lots of vendors use it for that. They also don't point out that like it's very performant because it'll just drop packets when it doesn't feel like it has the resources to capture them. The second part is it can get low-level kernel access, right? To say like from the syscall level, I can see what's happening. I can make context decisions. I can inspect not just the syscall, but the arguments to the syscall to maybe get some perspective of what it's attempting to do. So as a technology, it's awesome. Like it's super fun. It's super low level. It's super dangerous. Let's not this is basically ring zero or even lower in some ways inside your kernel. So just saying we need a vendor comes in and they want to install ebpf. You go, whoa. let me see what that ebpf virtual machine is actually doing. How do I de-risk this thing where you've just invited a vendor to come in and install a rootkit on all of your clusters, and then you paid them to do it. So I'm a little nervous
every node.
about that.
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. So I guess I'm a little snarky about it. I love ebpf as a technology, but as a third-party vendor, I get super nervous about it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's a tool in the tool belt. Is it the right one for the problems we have facing teams today? Maybe not for everybody, right? It has, I think it has its place. It's more along the lines of, is this the blunt object you want to bring to the party to get the job done, right? And what are you going to do with the output? Hundreds or thousands of these ebpf probes running across multiple clusters and multiple clouds it's no thing to take lightly. I think it introduces performance. I mean, it's performant, but it's not without penalty to operations teams and SREs who they're looking to keep these things operational, on day one and not introduce a lot of bottlenecks. So I think there's a future, there's a place for ebpf. I don't actually believe every security team is quite ready for the output or what the maintenance of these types of agents will introduce. I don't know. That's not really a hot take. It's just a use it, but buyer beware. I think it's
ebpf, or it's like a Linux kernel module to get that low level access, but then to contextualize it still, like it knows nothing about Kubernetes. So now it has to go back and recontextualize all the information that it just got at the syscall level and say, which container did this come from again? Okay, now I need to boil that up. So you lose, I would like to see someone say like, this is still performant, because once you bake the context of the execution back onto the thing that you've just detected, like that's a lot of overhead, as opposed to why not just watch it like as it's doing its thing in the upper layers of the process execution? Do we need to detect for this O-Day that China just dropped on us? Is that in our threat model of Kubernetes, or are we just really specifically worried about what are they going to do after? What do they do after they pop the kernel?
Well, you've probably been professionally engaged in the security testing of clusters running ebpf in the past. Has it thwarted your efforts?
Never thwarted, right? Like the products have always been like, maybe they've alerted if I'm not paying attention to being covert. But most of the times, I don't want to say anybody's name, but most of the times, like they're very specific on the actions. And as long as you're paying attention to the actions that it's detecting, just don't do those, or literally just rename the the binary to, instead of nmap, it's named something completely different. It evades these things. There's like sometimes it just boils down to string matching, even though you've got this awesome technology. So
you're saying if you read the default community rule set, you're probably fine and just do the opposite of what it says.
Yeah, sorry, open source.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that's
the truth. That's good. All right, Jordan, what do you got for us for our last 5 minutes of this party?
I've been encouraging everybody to try to get their questions in the Q&A. Otherwise, I get to selfishly ask my own questions.
I can't vote, because I would choose just YOLO every time for everything.
Yeah. So can we talk about, are there kinds of attacks that are very Kubernetes specific that contrast with your traditional monolith, like this flavor of attack versus that flavor of attack? Mark, I'd throw that one at you.
I think my favorite one to demonstrate is, because this is what training kind of like pen testers to break into the Kubernetes clusters. You always go like, I've got a shell. Like I used to get this message on my work chat, like I've got a shell in a pod. What do I do now? So we have to understand some of the proprietary stuff that exists there, and the ephemeral nature. Like appreciate that this isn't persistence. So the idea of like getting remote code execution, compromising a node, like now you're in 2 layers deep of this attack vector, where if this was a VM, you've already won. But you get 2 layers into the node, then you go, okay, the node, I want to prevest to the rest of the other clusters, the rest of the other nodes in the node pool. I can steal something like the kubelet credentials that are usually baked into like a default path and use that. Now you can literally run kubectl back to the admin control plane, compromise the rest of the node. So like the nature of the attack, like all I've just described is like, a privesc, which with extra steps, like knowing specifically where those items are is super useful. Thanks, documentation. But like it's the same attacks with just additional steps in the thing. Privesc, pivot, you reuse credentials that are exposed. It's the same thing as netpens. And once you teach that level of it, it kind of boils down to the similar. I don't know, Jimmy, what do you think? Like, you've done the same thing. You've got the same experience. So
I would just say, if you want to learn more, go to securekubernetes.com. The 2019 KubeCon workshop that I gave with Brad Giesman, Peter Benjamin, and Tabby Sable. All that stuff is still, it is 2019, but it might as well be 2022. It doesn't, nothing has changed because you're not leveraging ODays, you're not leveraging CVEs. It's a web app flaw at the end of the day, or some other entry point into two scenarios that are really fun for you to try on your own. Like I've never done the workshop with a group of people who haven't been like, oh, SHIT at the end. Like I just got root on this node. How, what? Like it's really fun. So yeah. That's the stuff we're up against.
It still works. So
we maintain it. It's open. It's all open to the world. So it's a fun one.
One of the things that I think is kind of interesting is like back to like the Kubernetes as the cloud. Like when you pop these things, you have these things that are very adjacent. Like a lot of people will run a container registry inside of the cluster, and then you just pull like locally from the cluster. So unlike in the cloud where you got to like, okay, there's this VM over here, and then I got to make sure I've got IAM access to connect to this like thing over here that has the container images or your Jenkins artifacts. It's all right there. So the attacks seem to be more next to each other, where if you need to exploit the registry, you can do it pretty easily, like from the same, literally from the same network segment. So like the attack vectors are there. So I feel like the attacks are condensed. You know, it's like you're not moving a lot around. You're not pivoting across different public IP space. You're just same cluster, same like /24 sometimes, and then you get persistent access to the supply chain. This is crazy.
And you have kube control inside of the cluster once you're there. Like you just pull the binary, and you're just an end user, and it's
no one will notice, right? It's just Kubernetes running as normal, unless your accounting department catches the fact that your bill went up. Not that would ever happen. Yeah, sure.
That's your ultimate security detection.
Yeah, like why did our bill go up?
Anonymous attendee asked something about CNIs and security groups. Ping me directly, and I'll circle back with Mark because we're at time. Sounds like a hefty question if we want to talk about CNIs and things like that. Send me a message at jimmy@ksoc.com or just on Twitter, Jim Mesta, and we'll talk about it. Just because
please send that question in, because that is actually a good one about built-in networking in your cloud providers, or what do you do with a Calico like CNI? We hit the time. I have to end the poll and end the party. Thanks everybody for showing up. We tried to keep this open and flowing, and we used 0 PowerPoint slides, so yay on us. We might do this again sometime. Yeah,
I think we should do it again sometime. Yeah, thank you so much, Mark, for taking the time today. And Jorn, and feel free to hit me up directly, or Jorn or any of us. We love this stuff. So
or if you didn't remember that email, reply back to the invite that you got. You should be able to.
There you go.
Way too. Anything you want.
And we'll try to get the first name at ksoc.com still. So
yeah, we're still running that way. All righty, folks, I'm going to end this, and again, we'll try to get this up on the interwebs as soon as the bits and bytes and blinky lights cooperate with us. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Jimmy.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Appreciate it. Cheers.
Bye.